Now I can hear you. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, the reason I came in is because I typically talk about philosophy as being broken. Philosophy is a broken science because philosophy tends to try to make sense of things rationally, logically, but excludes or to the exclusion of God. And I don't.
Are you a theist? Just really quick.
I'm a theist. Yes,
Okay.
I'm a theist. I imagine you're not a theist. You're an atheist.
I'm an atheist. Yeah.
Okay. So
That's
yeah,
okay.
this is a
Yeah.
perfect conversation then. I think
We'll see about that.
yeah, well, I mean, you're the right one to speak with because it's fascinating to me how people can find trust and answers and solutions in philosophy without having a God as a part of the framework. How does anything make sense or even have truth act without God's existence in the worldview?
Well, that's a good question. And I'll answer you in this kind of way. There's a map and there's a territory. And different maps show different features about what's interesting about the territory. Religion is a map and science is a map, but they're different kinds of maps of the same terrain. You can have a topological map and you can have a road map, and they show different things. That's not to say one is correct and the other is incorrect or better or anything like that, but they show different things and they show what's relevant and important for particular kinds of map users, depending on the kind of map that you have and depending on what they're looking for. So philosophy and science and any other sort of perspective is going to give you different linguistic and conceptual tool sets to use to describe and understand the world and the world experience. So religion is that way. So when you use the word God, to me, the word God is ambiguous, and that is suitable for religious contexts for people who want to think along those lines. But I don't think that it's necessary. And I think it's actually detrimental potentially for, I would say, most people. It's because, going off of something Plato had said in the Republic, most people have a difficult time differentiating between when is the time to take things literally and when is the time to take things metaphorically. This creates cases of equivocation in the listener's mind and other sorts of confusions. And from a philosopher's perspective, this isn't good because it's not clear thinking. Lack of clear thinking means that there's less opportunity for moral responsibility. And that's one of the things that I'm sort of interested in as well. Instead of using the word God, for instance, and for a religious person who wants to use that particular kind of map to describe the terrain, that's perfectly fine if that's useful for you. But I think that for most other people, a different sort of map might be more useful for what they're looking for. So to get to a more secular way of talking about pretty much the same thing, we can talk about the self. We can talk about the universal concept of a self, right, instead of a God. And when I say universal self, I don't mean anything sort of like hokey pokey and weird. I'm talking about the abstracted concept of what a self is, basically a dictionary definition, a generic definition, rather than referring to like a particular this person's self, that person's self. That's all I mean by universal self.
That's interesting because, I mean, I asked the question about how you have truth without a God. And basically what you said is that truth, in the analogy that you used about maps and different maps for different people, some are more suitable than others, you basically said that truth is subjective. That's the way I took what you were saying.
That's right. That's right. I'm a nominalist. And according to Aristotle, truth and falsity are properties of propositions. And propositions are abstract entities. And nominalists think that any abstract entity is philosophical fiction, not a literary fiction, but a philosophical fiction, meaning it's not real. And my worldview is that I'm a physicalist and I'm a nominalist. It means that truth as a property of propositions, which are abstract entities, are philosophical fictions. And it is subjective. One thing to make clear here is a lot of lay people, meaning people who are not formally trained in academic philosophy, will make the mistake of using the word subjective when they really are intending to talk about relativity. So being subjective just means that it's subject dependent, but there can be a universal subjectivity. That means that you and I, different subjects, can have shared experiences. Still, the experience itself requires for there to be a subject for the experience to be had. That's all that it means. But relative can mean that it's different from subject to subject. So usually when people use the word subjective, what they really mean is relative, because that's what they're trying to say. But to say that truth is subjective, I absolutely do think that truth is subjective, because as a nominalist, all these concepts require for there to be a subject. Even if you want to talk about a God subject, they would still need for there to be a subject.
I just don't want you to strawman my position. When I say subjective, I mean that it is stance dependent. It's dependent on human stances, whatever your particular position is.
Well, if you want to be perfectly neutral, though, you can say stance dependent, right? That's fine. But the God entity, that is also a subject, and that God entity is going to have a stance. So even if you were to say that something is based on a God entity, it's not going to be objective, it's going to be subjective, because it's going to be dependent on this God entity. So do you
think it's possible for there to be subjective things without an objective thing? How can the two are relative? Subjective and objective are relative terms.
That's not what relativity means, but yeah.
You can't have like an up without having a down. There is
right.
no down.
No, I understand that. We just have a different worldview. I'm a physicalist, so only physical things are real. Anything non-physical is not real. That
Wait, you said,
includes abstract concepts. That means that a property of something not real is also not going to be real. That means truth is not real.
but you said earlier that truth is not
Is a
real because
That's right.
it's a property of, yeah. And then you said you're a physicalist, which means what you're saying is physical things are real, are true. Would that
Real?
not
No, no, no,
would that
no.
not follow?
You're mixing up the words. Real and true are not synonymous.
Why not?
What do you mean? Why not? They're just not real. Okay, true and truth and falsity are properties of propositions. They're not
Yep.
properties of reality.
But when I say true, I also underneath the umbrella of true, I mean that it exists.
Yeah, but that's because of your metaphysics. You must be some sort of a realist about abstracta. That means that to you, a proposition which is non-physical is going to have some sort of relation to the physical, which I am calling reality. And that relation is going to be described by the properties of truth and falsity, which means that that gives the truth and falsity properties of propositions in your case, because you're a realist. You think that non-physical entities have some sort of reality, that those properties also have some sort of relationship to reality. And so truth and falsity have a slightly different meaning on your metaphysical worldview than on mine. And if
So I
you
want to
impose your
understand.
worldview onto mine, then there's just going to be miscommunication there.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to understand your worldview because I think it's very interesting. You categorize these two separately. So in your worldview, when you say real, do you mean by that really exists? Is that what you mean?
So when we talk about existence, a lot of the times when we use words, there's always two ways for things to be thought about. There's a concept, and then there's the thing the concept is meant to refer to. The concept is a non-physical entity, but it's not a real thing on my worldview, right? The thing that it's meant to refer to, a lot of times we think of that as real or reality, right? Whatever the so-called external world is. So
But
real,
I'm asking about your worldview, and like if you were to say this phone is real.
I'll give you an example. So there's some physicality that is out there, and I am wrapping that physicality in a conceptual skin, which is not real. It's a philosophical fiction. So I'm wrapping up that physicality, which is the only reality there is. The non-physical conceptual stuff that I've made up, that my consciousness has made up, has created, that's not real. That's a fictional skin that I've wrapped the physicality up in, that I've decided to carve up at particular joints that seem natural to me, where I've carved up reality at what seems to me to be natural joints. And I've wrapped up and separated and distinguished the physicality, which is totally continuous, but I've made it discontinuous, and I've made them separate by wrapping up parts and pieces of the physicality with these conceptual skins that are fictions. And this part of physicality I've wrapped up in a concept called phone. And so the concept phone, when I am referring to this bit of physicality here, that concept is not real. But the physicality is real, but the concept phone is not real. So when I think of it as a phone, this physicality, it's not actually a phone. It's a map of the territory, and the map is not the territory.
Yeah, but I mean, I can't ask you if it is real without giving you a descriptor. So
Because you can't think about or talk about what reality is without dressing it up in something that isn't essentially real.
does it exist? Does it actually exist or no?
I'm going to repeat, the physicality is real and it
Meaning that it
exists, but not qua phone.
Okay, so that's fine. I have no problem with that. I was just wondering if you believed that you are this kind of solipsist who doesn't.
No,
believe
I'm not
that
an
the external
idealist.
world
I'm a
exists.
physicalist.
Okay. So then the external world does exist in your worldview.
It does, but this is where the equivocation happens, in my view. That concept is fiction. It's not real. It's a word game. And it's a way for my consciousness to organize my experience of the external world or the physicality. So
Okay,
I'm not
so
denying the physicality at all. Absolutely not. I'm actually saying that the concept is what's not real. So I'm at the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
the follow-up question I have is, then how do you know that physical entity actually exists? Whether you give it the name of phone or whatever name, Zumba, it doesn't matter, whatever you call
Yeah.
it. How do you know that it exists in your worldview?
I have experiences. My experiences indicate to me that there's something external there that exists independently of my thoughts about it. It's sort
But
of
those
like
experiences
when I
are
realize,
not real, right?
no, the experiences are real. So
Oh,
I think that the
okay.
phenomena of experience is real, but I think that the conceptualization of it, the further processing of it to turn it into coherent thought, that product is not real. I think consciousness is real. Consciousness to me is a physically happening event, like a lightning storm. We can talk about like physical particles interacting, and then there's a,
Consciousness is physical. Interesting.
I think
Okay.
consciousness is a physically happening event in any case. So it's not like consciousness is like a substance or a thing like that. Okay. It's more like a lightning storm, which is more of an event. There's a beginning and end to lightning storms. There's not an edge to it. but there's a general location where lightning storms happen. Like it could be happening over London, but not over Greece or Spain. And it could be happening on Monday, but not on Wednesday. There's a beginning and end to these things. And I think that's the sort of thing that consciousness is. So it's a physical event. And because it's a physical event, it's real.
So how can you say that a descriptor is not real, but an experience is real when both of them are in the realm of the mind? Both of them stem from the mind. A person can have an experience that does not align with the physical reality or the physicality, as you were saying.
That's okay. The experience is real, though. The experience is not the same thing as the thought about the experience. That's consciousness processing the raw ingredient that experience is. Experience is a chaos. Okay. Experience itself is real. It's what consciousness is doing in some sense. It's experiencing, and that experience is real, but consciousness has I want to call it tendency. We could call it a nature, has a nature to want to organize the experiences that it's having. And as an output, it processes those experiences and produces conceptualizations.
But
That's
it just sounds to me like there's an inconsistency in your worldview. Like the way I judge worldviews is if the worldview leads to a contradiction or an inconsistency.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I don't see a contradiction or incoherency in anything I've said. If there's something I could explain.
Yeah, so what it seems like to me is that the inconsistency is what you put under the set of real things and non-real things. Those things which are real, you're saying it is physical.
Physical, yeah.
Things which are not real, you're saying essentially it's in a realm of the mind. It sounds to me like the way that you're... It's
non-physical, and I would say it's the product of the mind. You can plan to have an experience, like you want to go on a boat ride, you want to experience what it's like to jump out of a plane. You can plan and choose to have an experience in that kind of way. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you can't choose to experience a pinprick. Right, you have to actually prick your finger on a pin and then experience it that way. You can choose to prick your finger.
How do you know that's not a figment of your mind or a product of your mind? How do you know that?
You're asking an epistemological question, and I'll have to explain that as a separate thing, and we can get into that. But that's a slightly different question than what we were talking about earlier. I'll finish this up, and then we can talk about epistemology if you want to do that.
Yeah, okay, because the reason I asked that question is because in your worldview, it sounds to me like the issue is that you're just making claims, really. You're just saying it is real.
No, yeah. So we'll get into epistemology. I think you can say the same thing about your worldview.
No, I don't think you can.
But let's. I think that you can. I think that I can. So in any case, but let me finish this up, and then we can get into epistemology. Okay. Right. So the concepts that consciousness creates, these are not real. These are philosophical fictions. I distinguish them from literary fictions. Literary fiction is when the fiction is not meant to refer to something real. We can have a Harry Potter world. That's a world of literary fiction. And we can have propositions formed about that literary fictional world. And those propositions about that literary fictional world can be true or false. Like if I said Harry Potter is a boy, that would be a true statement about the fictional world, but it would be a true statement. And if I said Harry Potter is a girl, that would be a false statement about a fictional world. And that's a literary fiction. In the case of literary fiction, we want the referent to be something not real to begin with. Now, philosophical fiction, when we talk about philosophical fiction, it is still a fiction, meaning it's not real, right? But it's meant to be about reality. So that's the difference between literary fiction, which is intended to be about something not real, whereas philosophical fiction is meant to be or intended to be about something real, i.e. the external world or the physical world or whatever. The things that we think, the conceptualizations we come up with to describe and talk about and organize and think about the external world is still a fiction, but it's a philosophical fiction because we intend for that fiction to be about reality rather than about something not real. So that's the difference between philosophical and literary fiction.
Okay, so I'm asking the follow-up question then. If this is something that is real, right? This is a philosophical fiction, is just speaking about the real world and reality as it exists, and that is the empirical world and what you experience and so forth. My question then is, how do you come to the conclusion, especially with the problem of hard solipsism being a real issue with anyone who doesn't have God as a foundation, how do you conclude that is real, that it actually exists?
Good. So this is a good question. So the kind of knowing that I'm using here is the Gnostic type of knowing, which is experiential knowledge, or if you want to call it acquaintance knowledge. We're not talking about epistemic knowledge here. Epistemic knowledge is a very particular sort of knowledge, and that's a different sort of thing. We can talk about epistemic knowledge if you want, but this is where equivocation happens a lot. English speakers will equivocate between acquaintance or the Gnostic type of knowledge with the epistemic type of knowledge. And those are two different types of knowing, two different types of knowledge. knowledge. When you say, how do I know? If you're asking me, how do I know epistemically? That's a different question from asking me, how do I know things gnostically? That's a different sort of question. Some things can't be known epistemically and some things can't be known gnostically. So there's different domains for each of these things.
You don't know and you don't have epistemic knowledge of it nor Gnostic knowledge of it.
No, I do have Gnostic knowledge that there is a physical world.
How so?
Through the senses, through the experiences. And the moment you discount that and you go down the rabbit hole and you want epistemic justification for the Gnostic knowledge that you have, you are removing a key piece of evidence that you actually need to use in order to have epistemic knowledge. Because the thing that grounds, the things that grounds your belief and tethers your justification to reality is something that is going to come from a Gnostic encounter, from that type of direct knowledge that isn't epistemic. That's the kind of knowledge, that's the kind of knowledge that is going to be the grounds that tethers your justificatory account to reality, that is the connector between reality and your belief. This is what gives meaning to properties of propositions like true and false. If you want to get rid of the grounds, then you're just not going to have episteme at all. And then you're down the rabbit hole. So my suggestion is, don't go down the rabbit hole to begin with. In other words, don't get confused and equivocate between Gnostic knowledge and epistemic knowledge.
I get your point, but the issue is that all you're doing is presupposing it. You're just saying...
I don't think that you fully understand what I'm saying, to be honest. You understand what I mean by grounding?
Yes, of course. grounding that you're the way I understand what you're saying is that you are axiomatically saying that the external world is there. You're not justifying it epistemically. You're saying...
I don't need to justify... That's right. Because exactly. Because the grounds... Listen. If epistemic knowledge is justified true belief, okay?
I agree with that definition.
I agree with that definition. And then we can talk about your definition of episteme then. But according to what I accept as epistemic knowledge, okay, it's going to be justified true belief. And under the heading justified, if we actually look at what's said in the Meno, because that's what I'm going off of, right? That's my choice. So then if we look at what the text says, episteme is not just an account alone, but it includes the grounding element, because justification is what tethers the belief to some origin or cause for that belief. And that origin or cause for that belief is going to be, I think, something we experience from reality. There's going to be something phenomenological that is going to be the grounds, the origin or cause for the belief that we have. And the justification is the language, the logos, the reasoning, the words that connect that experience, and we verbalize it, we articulate that, and then we form. Plato talks about the idea or the origin or cause of the belief, and that isn't included in JTB. JTB is in English. My guess is because the grounds, which is the idea, that's an element there that needs to be included somehow in the J part, in the justification, but we've either left it out or we've just tacitly included it into the justification, but then people forgot about it. So then we're like, where did that go?
Before you go on, I want to make sure I understand you so that we're not talking past each other. And when you say that it is the grounds, do you mean that it breaks the regression? It breaks that infinite regress that gives it a foundation for why something can be whatever.
So
it is.
Plato, I think, was a foundationalist. So what I'm saying is that the idea doesn't require, according to Plato's definition of episteme, not Gnostic knowledge, that grounds doesn't need further justification. That is part of what gives credibility to the justification or to the belief through the justification. The grounding element is the idea, and that idea needs to be tethered to the true belief, the proposition that's true. Because otherwise, according to the story that's told there in the Meno, is that we can have true beliefs by luck, by chance. And Plato and Socrates say that this true belief that we can obtain either by luck or skill, doesn't matter, the true belief alone can be just as good of a guide to success, our destination point, Larissa, right, as epistemic knowledge. They're both good as guides. So it's not that one is less as good of a guide as the other. The thing that makes one thing slightly better in some sense, not better in the quality of the truthiness of the belief itself, but better in terms of some other pragmatic function or value that it might have, is that the epistemic thing, that's not going to fly away. So we don't lose it as easily. I'm going to use the analogy of a balloon. We have a balloon filled with air. The grounding element is something that would have some weight to it. When you get to the Gettier problem, there is the issue of equivocation going on in that situation as well. In fact, the Gettier problem doesn't even arise if you understand that this linguistic issue is happening.
No other philosopher has ever been able to get around it. So you might be the first.
I might be the first, yeah.
If I can just be very clear. The reason I am pointing at this, I'm not going roundabout and I'm not diverting. The reason I'm pointing at this is because this is your justification.
What you're asking for is going to result in a regress. Originally, there is no regress. Under the original definition of episteme, according to what Plato gave as a recipe, justified true belief, okay,